Good evening. I would like to call our Town of Sydney Special Council Budget Meeting on Tuesday, February 22nd, 2022 to order at 6 p.m. Hello to members of the public who are watching the live webcast or to those who may be watching a recording at a later date. I'm Mayor McNeil Smith, and joining me in the council chamber is, to my left, is Councillor Garnett. Our 5 councillor colleagues are joining us virtually this evening. You can see them on your screen. Good evening to Councillor Sarah Duncan, Councillor Barbara Fallett, Councillor Terry O'Keefe, Councillor Chad Rentoul, and Councillor Peter Wainwright. We have 4 staff participating in the meeting from the chamber this evening. We have our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Humble, our Director of Corporate Services, Mr. Hicik, our Corporate Officer, Ms. Nelson, and our Manager of Communications, Ms. Judson. And we'll have several staff who may be participating virtually as well, and they will be introduced by Mr. Humble or myself as they speak. As per the message at the top of our agenda, a reminder that our council chamber is again open for in-person attendance at council and committee of the whole meetings, however with a limited seating capacity, and wearing a mask in the chamber is currently required. Members of the public who would like to attend in person or participate electronically through either public participation period, presentations, or public hearings are asked to register in advance through our administration department, and their contact info is at the top of the agenda. Written correspondence directed to either staff or to Mayor and Council may also be sent to our admin department. And next, I'd like to turn to territorial acknowledgement and acknowledge with respect that we're holding this evening's meeting in the territory of the Wasanish Nation. We are grateful to be sharing, living and sharing these lands with the Wasanish people and stewarding these lands together in the future. I'll now turn to approval. Look for a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
I'll move approval of the agenda.
Second.
Moved and seconded, and all in favor? I see all in favor. Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move to our special public participation opportunity this evening. Speakers have 4 minutes. We ask that they provide their name and address and address council on our budget deliberations this evening. We have 2 speakers registered, and I'd first turn to Ms. Dillis Halford. If you could confirm your connection.
Hello, my name is Dillis.
Good evening. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Dillis Halford, and I'm a resident of Sydney, living in the area of Resthaven Park. I'm speaking to you with regard to the proposed fenced off-leash dog area. The town has proposed a dog park for the exclusive use of less than 15% of the town of Sydney's households. This number is based upon 2021 Stats Canada data and 800 dog licenses issued by the town in 2021. The town is considering a proposal to build a fenced off-leash dog area in Resthaven Park that will cover up to 50% of the park. The town is funding this proposed project from the Development Cost Charges Reserve. The vision for Resthaven Park and all other parks, developed through an extensive process of community engagement, was published in 2019 Park Concept Plans. Resthaven Park is not identified as a suitable location for a dog park in that plan. In the community engagement plan, the town has stated guidelines on how to proceed with consultation. Key words are inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. Goals are set and promises are made. In my opinion, the town has not lived up to its promises in this process. 1, it did not inform that it had made a wholesale change in the park concept plan for Resthaven Park. 2, it did not consult per its stated promise that they would listen and acknowledge residents' concerns. 3, it did not involve or collaborate. And 4, it has assumed that empowerment is in council's hands. The promise, we will implement what you, the residents of Sydney, decide has been broken. Staff and council appear to be dictating that Resthaven Park will have an off-leash dog area. It is not engaged in a transparent, meaningful dialogue with the residents and neighborhood. It has used data collected in a flawed survey, not specific to the neighborhood residents or to the residents of Sydney, to validate its approval for the project. It states that residents of other neighborhood parks do not want an off-leash dog area, and you, Resthaven Park, must have it because it will be challenged to find another location. I respectfully request that council remove from its proposed budget the $40,000 allocation for a fenced off-leash dog area in Resthaven Park. A popular vote based on the results of a flawed survey must not be accepted as a justification for moving forward with this proposal. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Halford, for coming before council tonight and providing your input. At the last meeting of council, we referred the dog park item to a future meeting because we've requested additional information from staff. You're correct, it is in the budget this evening. It does not have tax implications directly. So we may speak to it tonight, but council will be coming, has not made a decision yet, and will be coming back to the matter at a meeting subsequent to this meeting this evening. But we do appreciate you expressing your views.
Thank you very much. And if you would need my full address, I'll be happy to give it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Good
Have a
night,
good
and thank you for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
Thank
I'll now turn to our next speaker, Ms. Sheila Fay. Good evening. If you can confirm your connection.
No.
So, can you hear me?
We can hear you well. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council. It's nice to see you all. I'm Sheila Fay, and I live at number 23-10457 Resthaven Drive in Sydney. I'm coming to you again about the off-leash dog park proposed for the waterfront park at Resthaven Drive. I might sound like a not in my backyard. I don't want to appear that way, but several issues are causing me to speak out on this issue again. The fact that the park has children's playgrounds so close to the proposed dog area causes me concern for the usually very small children that use this park on a daily basis. The other concern is cars on this road and in this area is problematic already because of the number of cars parked there on a daily basis. Many times when driving, one must pull over to let other cars, buses, and larger trucks go by because there are cars on both sides of the road. Add dog parents driving to use the dog park and the huge possibility and rumor that you are considering bike lanes on this road, the traffic would almost be impossible to navigate safely. One other factor is the bird sanctuary that we have in this area and the number of new birds that are now visiting the park, feeding, breeding, laying their eggs all through this area entices the dogs to chase and disturb the wildlife. I want to thank you for listening to me about this, but today I also visited with Janet Rourke, who is the harbor master here at Resthaven, and she has some big issues regarding herself from the harbor master and also from the Federal Fisheries Department. Number one, she told me, the federal government is wondering why they were not consulted at any time during these deliberations, as it was the federal government who gave the park to the town of Sydney. Number two, The birds who use the park for laying their eggs and teaching their babies in the springs will not survive. Number 3, parking. Many have already tried to use the federal parking area to take their dogs into the park. She wastes a lot of time monitoring the parking and asking people to leave. Many times it is not received well. Then the parking on the street that is already causing issues around the park is exacerbated. Number 4, federal fisheries is very concerned because fresh food is sold on the docks all year round. Having dogs off leash, which so many do, can cause contaminations on the dock and will cause the fisheries to close the docks. Many dog owners have taken exception to being told that their dogs must be on a leash. This is going to be problematic. I just want to thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you for the chance to be able to speak this evening. Good night.
Thank you, Sheila Fay. Thanks for coming before council. I'm not sure if you could hear the response or comments I made to the previous speaker, but
Absolutely, I did.
Okay, it is going to a future meeting and we have requested additional information. We certainly appreciate your input.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for the chance. All right.
Good evening.
Good night. Cheers. I will.
And with that, I will bring public participation to a close, and we'll now turn to our main business under Section 5, which is our 2022 to 2026 financial plan and our budget deliberations this evening. We have a report and a presentation from Mr. Hicik. Mr. Hicik, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Welcome to our final stage of our budget process. We've gone through 2 meetings already. The first one was a detailed introduction. At the second meeting, Council had the opportunity to ask a number of questions, make a number of resolutions for consideration. But the way I think about it was that the second meeting laid the groundwork for what is to come today. Perhaps we made fewer decisions at the second meeting than we normally do, but I think there was a lot of ground to cover, and we certainly covered that at that meeting, leaving most of the decision making for this final part of the process. Tonight's presentation will be much shorter than the 2 you've seen before. Essentially, there's no new information here. It's just a very quick recap of where we stand, the changes that were made at the last meeting, and then consideration of the budget by area. And it mirrors the staff report for tonight's meeting in going through the various parts of the budget that need to be considered prior to approving the whole thing. And following this brief opening summary, Council will have a chance to go through those various areas one by one and approve changes to the budget by resolution. And subject to tonight's review, I anticipate the resolutions will go something like this. Any additions, deletions, or changes to the budget, and then approval of the general operating budget as amended, and approval of the general capital budget as amended. If all goes well, we'll get there. As mentioned, this is the third stage of our process. If for whatever reason we don't get there tonight, we do have the luxury of scheduling additional meetings. At the last meeting, there were a few decisions made. One was to defer one of the supplemental items, being the citizen survey, from this year to next year. That was the only change that had a tax impact. It reduced the proposed tax increase for 2022 by $30,000. At the last meeting, the water and sewer budgets were approved, and there was one small change to a water capital project in terms of its funding source. So we started out with a general tax increase of 4.98% for this year. And with that one reduction from the last meeting, we're down to 4.73, which represents approximately $75 for the average household, or $625 a month. It's important to note that each 1% increase costs the average household about $1.32 a month, or $16 a year. And in case council is looking to reduce the tax impact, reducing it by 1% will require a cut of $122,000 of tax-funded items. And just for context, every $5,000 of costs within the budget has an impact of 5 cents a month to the average household. So it's in fact negligible for the average resident, but for $5,000 we can actually get something put in place for the community. You've seen this table before, just shows the impact on the tax bill. So right now we're projecting municipal taxes of $1,661 for the average household, or $138 a month, which is an increase of $75 as mentioned previously. Now, one of the common themes throughout the process to date has been the need to eventually get back to full revenue levels following the reductions in tax revenues after COVID hit. So 2020, we rolled back our tax increase for all taxpayers and further reduced the taxes for commercial taxpayers by 10%, knowing that eventually we'd have to bring it back to what I term, the regular full taxation levels. We were lucky enough to get a large amount of Safe Restart grants from the federal government, and that's allowed us to phase back to regular taxation over a number of years. We're still using a fairly large amount of Safe Restart funding this year, and the last large chunk will be allocated to the 2023 budget. After that time, we've got roughly $400,000 in funding that must be made up, which equates to a tax impact of roughly 3%. So it's not as scary as it might appear on that previous slide, in that if we continue to tax for the new ongoing items, we'll only have to make up for those depleted Safe Restart funds. That can be done all at once in 2024, or in smaller increments between now and then. We could also choose to allocate some surplus funding to decrease the impact and increase the phase-in period. Also, we're expecting more new tax revenues than I'm currently projecting, which should go a long way to reducing the future impacts. But at this time, we're being more conservative in that regard. So to begin our deliberations, I would suggest we focus on the supplemental requests for 2022. So I've broken it out into one-time requests for this year, ongoing requests beginning in 2022, and thirdly, future year supplementals. So as we consider these one at a time, the suggestion is that not every item on this list has to be considered separately, but if any member of council wishes to make a motion to reduce or change one of the items or defer, or has a question on any of them, we focus on that particular item. And once the list has been depleted, then we can move on to the next section. And once all changes have been completed to all the supplemental categories, then I would entertain a motion to approve the supplemental items as amended. So we begin first with one-time requests for 2022, and there are 7 of them listed here.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik. I would ask if you could take down the slides so that I can see council members more easily in our deliberations. I appreciate how the agenda is set up, and that we do have it broken out into separate sections, and as you've indicated, we can now next go to 5B1, the 2022 one-time supplements, which is Appendix A. Appendix A does of 8 one-time supplemental requests in the general operating budget. We have spoken to the first one of those at a previous meeting, so there are 7 to consider. And I would turn to council members if they have a question on any of the items, or if they wish to raise the item to make a change to it in the budget. I'll first turn to Councillor Wainwright and then Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is going to start, I guess, a general discussion about the amenity funds and whether we want to use amenity funds, the amenity reserve for any projects. But looking at our policy and what amenity funds are to be used for, one of the items specifically on the list is park improvements. So we have a very small project here, which is the net extension at Iroquois Park. That is a park improvement for the benefit of the neighborhood. It is also a very small amount of money. It's not going to make a lot of difference on taxes. But if council is looking to make some reductions and is open to using the amenity reserve to fund some projects this year, that would be one. So to get the ball rolling, I'll move that the next extension at Iroquois Park be funded from the amenity reserve.
Second?
So we moved by Councillor Wainwright, second, sorry, was that Councillor Fallon?
Yes.
Did you wish to motivate further, Councillor Wainwright?
No, I think it's straightforward.
Thank you. Councillor Fallon?
No, Councillor Wainwright's covered it.
Okay, I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, just to say that that was actually something that I was going to bring forward as well, so I would support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call a question. All in favor? I see all members in favor. The motion carries. Thank you. Did you have another item, Councillor Wainwright?
No.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. So the item that I'm going to look at first is the downtown parking study at $50,000. And so what I would propose, or I'll move that the $50,000 for the downtown parking study be funded from the off-street parking reserve.
Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Rintoul. Please motivate Councillor O'Keefe.
Sure. So as I understand it, the purpose of this particular reserve is for the purpose of providing new and existing off-street parking spaces. And while I recognize that normally we would be looking to fund capital items from a reserve fund. However, I think that in order to determine the number of spaces or what we're going to do with off-street parking, it seems reasonable to do some sort of study that will help us determine the additional need for off-street parking. I also note that we used funds from this reserve to fund the multi-family parking study, so it seems like an appropriate use of the funds. That's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. No, I think Councillor Keith has done a good job articulating, the rationale for using this reserve for this purpose. In that there's a precedent for a recent parking study having been funded from the reserve as well. I'm comfortable with the suggestion, but look forward to hearing my colleagues' comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll turn to Mr. Hicik or other staff if they wish to comment on this item, and then I'll go to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As Councillor O'Keefe pointed out, it is my preference to use our reserves mainly for capital expenditures, or in some cases for studies that would lead to capital expenditures. However, the rationale given for the use of the parking reserve for the parking study, if council is willing to support it, then I think it's supportable from a legislative standpoint as well.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright, then myself for comments. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the suggestion of using the reserve for this purpose, but I'm also a bit hesitant because I'd like to see the reserve actually used to create parking rather than, than study. I wonder if maybe a compromise might be appropriate, and that is fund half of the 50,000 from the parking reserve and leave the other half funded from taxes. That would be a significant cut. It would still leave us looking for more things, but it would make a less of a hit on the parking reserve.
Thank you for the comment and suggestion, Councillor Wainwright. I'll perhaps other speakers may wish to speak, and then if you wish to come back on an amendment, that would certainly be appropriate. I have a question through to staff. In the off-street parking reserve, we see a beginning balance this year of $427,000. That apart from this motion, $33,000 is intended to come out of that reserve to other projects, or to projects, which will leave a balance of $394,000. Can staff, and I appreciate this is a question a bit on the spot, comment on to the level of funding that has come out of the off-street parking reserves, appreciating that we don't replenish that reserve from property tax, but rather from development, certain aspects of developments.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, I didn't quite get the question. What are you asking me to comment on?
Sorry, in the off-street parking reserve,
Yeah.
Would staff have a comment on, has that reserve been, I don't recall that reserve being drawn down particularly over the last 2 or 3 years of our term, but memory doesn't always serve. I don't currently have that in front of me, but as the meeting progresses, I'll try and find it and provide an answer. Like, we have used it from time to time for various initiatives. I believe in 2021 we used it for last year's payment to Mary Winspear for the CSB access road, and that's what the remaining $33,000 is for this year. All right. Okay.
But I can't recall off the top of my head whether we used it for anything else over the last 2 years.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. I'll turn to other speakers. Councillor Wainwright, did you wish to make an amendment?
Sure. I'll move that we amend the motion so that 25,000 is funded from the parking reserve.
Second.
We have moved and seconded. Any further discussion on the amendment? Councillor O'Keefe.
Thanks. I appreciate this suggestion, although I'm still comfortable with sticking with the 50,000. I think it's there's a good amount of money in that reserve. I don't think 25,000 would make or break any. If we came up with some sort of project, whether it was to buy extra space or whatever to create more parking spaces. But I think it's reasonable to fund the full amount from the reserve, and from that then get some idea of where we might actually invest further. So I won't support the amendment, but thanks for the suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor O'Toole.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor. And likewise, I appreciate the suggestion. I feel like when we're talking about parking, sort of in this reserve, the difference of the $25,000 that's been suggested is almost, splitting hairs in terms of what that amount of money would purchase us in a capital program, as was suggested. And so I think there's an opportunity here to make a real difference by utilizing the $50,000 from this reserve. So I would prefer to support the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Toole. I will just to speak that that I support the amendment, and I concur with Councillor Wainwright. I would like to see as much of this parking reserve go to actually parking spaces, but I also appreciate that there is a precedent for us using such reserve funds for the planning of capital projects as well as the capital investment itself. I'll leave my remarks there. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question on the amendment. All in favor? Opposed? We have 4 opposed, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Fallett, Councillor Rantoul. The motion is defeated. That leaves the main motion on the floor to alter the funding. Any further discussion on the main motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you. So, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I had 2 other items, but I'm not sure what category they fall into. One was the bike racks for 5,000, and the other one was for pedestrian crossings at 15,000. So,
okay, Councillor O'Keefe, if I might interject for a moment, those will be later on in other supplemental requests.
Okay.
Thank you. Did you have anything within the one-time for 2022 in Appendix A?
No, that was all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to colleagues if I don't see any other items wishing to be raised. So I will leave, we will move on to the next section, and that is, I'm sorry, Councillor Wainwright.
Sorry, Mayor, are you going to move on to ongoing supplementals or one-time supplementals in future years?
I'm going to move to 5B2, 2022 ongoing supplementals.
Okay, thank you. I'll wait.
No, thank you. And so that will cover the items in Appendix B, of which there are 8 items. And there are also 2 additional reports, as Council will note, in Appendix C and Appendix D, which speak directly to 2 of the initiatives. And we did have those reports at a previous meeting and have some discussion, but we forwarded them to this evening's deliberations. So before going to Council, if they have any questions or items that they want to speak to out of those 8, I will actually turn to the first one, the Human Resources Manager, and the report is Appendix C. If it's Council's wishes to leave that in the budget as it is presented, then we would need no motion at this time, and it will be approved when we approve the overall general operating budget. But if the Council have any further questions or wish to amend, now would be the appropriate time. I'll turn to Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. As mentioned prior, I don't support this position at this time. Looking at the census data, the community actually hasn't grown that much in the 5 years since the 2016 census, which was surprising, but yet not that surprising. I guess I'm struggling around having too many exempt employees in a community of our size with a staff level that we have. It's currently 75, and then we have staff that we hire during the summer usually that's casual or on call, and then to have 16 exempt members. And partly it's because I'm trying to think of a perspective of a taxpayer and whether they would feel comfortable with us expanding our exempt staff at the higher level of the pay structure. And also it's partly because I have confidence, and I realize I understand the rationale in the staff report and it's well laid out, but I also have confidence in our senior level staff to be able to carry out the function, given that they've done, I think, quite a good job over the last few years. And if there's an area where we can say, you know, maybe this is not the time for that, we're not quite out of COVID, hopefully we will be soon. We've already had Mr. Hicik discuss the fact that, you know, the years coming forward are going to be challenging because we're going to have to resume normal tax levels. And this is something I think that should be revisited in the future as the town has grown substantially more. and the staffing levels. As it sits now, I just don't see how it's a fit. And I have a real struggle putting it in my mind, leaving it in the budget as it is. But if anybody else wants to make a comment, I'll leave it right there. Mr. Mayor, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. I think it would be appropriate, and thank you for your remarks. If you want to make a motion, I mean, council can deliberate and choose. So I appreciate we can't comment on these items, but if you also wish to make a motion to amend.
Yeah, I'll move that the human resources manager position be deleted.
Okay. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Okay. So moved by Councillor Garnett, seconded by Councillor Fallett. Councillor Garnett, you have motivated to some degree. Would you like to continue? Thank you.
That's fine.
I'll turn to Councillor Fallett.
Thank you. I too have struggled with this cost and the additional exempt staff at this time. I understand, the presentation of why this is being needed and requested, etc. I'm just looking at the size of our operation and our town, and I just have some real concerns with the amount of exempt staff. And I wonder if there is another way around increasing the staff if it's a matter of dispersing work and not have it be an exempt person. I don't know what the answer is. I'm not going to presume to know that, but I just have difficulty approving this cost outlay at this time. So I won't be supporting the hiring of an HR person.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you to my colleagues for raising their concerns with this. I have a contrary opinion and won't support the motion. I think what surprises me with a complement of 75 staff is that we don't have a dedicated employee responsible for human resources. I don't think this is a task that should be a distraction for someone else or dealt with on the side of their desk. We're in a very competitive environment for professional municipal staff. Things like attracting employees and retaining employees take time and expertise. And I think we would be doing a disservice to our organizational structure as we seek organizational excellence to not have a dedicated professional in this role. So I won't support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I echo Councillor Rintoul's comments. I guess the other thing that I do look at this and say, yes, it is a lot of money putting in a position like this. And once you start, once you've committed to an exempt position, there is a cost if you decide later that you don't need it. But the alternative, in terms of additional help to get it done, is you contract an HR consultant to help out, or you contract consultants to backfill for our senior staff while they deal with HR stuff. And I think the big problem with expecting our senior staff, CIO, et cetera, to continue doing the HR stuff is HR matters can be a very high priority. They can be urgent. And because of that, they can easily interfere with other priorities that we expect those positions to be dealing with. So having somebody who's dedicated for HR means that the job gets done properly because they're giving it the attention they need to, not off the side of their desk. And if something urgent comes up, it doesn't automatically interfere with other priorities for our senior staff. So I think this makes sense.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I continue to support the position for an HR manager. I don't think we should be putting a whole lot of emphasis or having concern about adding an extra exempt position. I mean, the fact of the matter is an HR manager is always going to be an exempt position because they handle sensitive sorts of things. So, that's the way it has to be. In terms of possibilities, I considered, as Councillor Wainwright suggested, could you contract something out like this? Or could you have someone come in part-time? The problem that I see with that is if you have somebody that's kind of flitting in and flitting out, you actually lose the value of that position. You want somebody that's embedded in the management team within the organization that has got an ongoing dialogue with all the managers, has a sense of what's going on, and has the ability to be looking strategically at the organization and identifying potential issues in terms of labor relations or staffing or recruitment, and addressing those or bringing them to management's attention before they blow up. We've got also a labor relations process starting this fall. And I guess just from personal experience, having spent, a good amount of my career in human resources, seeing the amount of time that managers often have to expend on labor relations issues or staffing and recruitment and retention, it takes up a lot of time, and it really does pull them away from the, that work that they need to do. So I know it's a lot of money, but I believe it's a good investment for the organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Any other first-time speakers? I will speak briefly to say that I concur with those who have spoken in favor of this position coming to the organization. I think it's important. I think our Chief Administrative Officer, who has many years of experience in this organization, has made a good case in the report, demonstrating the experience and the need. And I think that need has become a little greater, and now that the organization has reached 75 union employees and 15 exempt employees. And so I am in support of it. I will just comment very briefly that at the last meeting I did raise an option and sought comment from the Chief Administrative Officer on deferring this position to begin in 2023, which would remove the $45,000 cost from this year, but then put embed the full cost as it would be anyway in 2023. I'm not in favor of going that route, subsequent to the remarks made by Mr. Humble, but also appreciating where labor negotiations will be moving forward this coming year. Seeing no further speakers, I'll call the question. All in favor? Those opposed? We have Councillor Rintoul, Councillor Duncan, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor O'Keefe, and myself opposed. The motion is defeated. Councillor Garnett, please.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question, quickly, if I might, to Mr. Hicik. Just mentioning in the financial binder, just for the community's perception, when you speak to the fact that it's still cheaper as far as the RCMP, additional RCMP officer, and the RCMP contract, when you speak to the fact that it's still more cost effective to have the RCMP than municipal services. And I wonder, has your opinion altered given that the province is downloading dispatch services? If you factor that into everything, do you still think it is more economical for the community to have that as opposed to being a municipal force?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I do believe it is more cost effective to contract with the RCMP. If we had our own police force, factoring in the pending increases to the RCMP contract, I still believe that they're not quite in parity with municipal police forces. And if we did have a municipal force, we would definitely be paying our dispatch costs entirely. In the manner we're doing it now, we take advantage of a wider cost share opportunity for dispatch. and certain other overhead services.
Thank you for the clarification. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett. And I note you were speaking to the third item, the additional RCMP officer, but also into the service in general. I would next turn Council's attention to the fourth item, which the 24-hour staffing at the fire department, and we had a staff report which is included as Appendix D. Again, if we approve of this as presented, we do not need a motion, but if council members have any further questions or they wish to amend, certainly a motion would be appropriate. I don't see any speakers. I do have something to bring forward, and that is council will recall that I had reached out to Mr. Hicik via email, and with regards to the possible prorating of this, given when the 24-hour staffing would begin, and the incremental amount of $77.5 we're asking for is to run the program for the entire 2022 calendar year, but we won't have the full program in place for January and February, and so I had suggested prorating of that, which would be a cost of $64,600, and thus a saving or a removal from the budget of $12,900. And Mr. Hicik responded that that could be appropriate, and I'll just turn to Mr. Hicik if he has a further comment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I know the chief has been doing some degree of 24-hour staffing on an ongoing basis, but if this was prorated to 10 months instead of 12, we would find a way to fit it within the reduced budget.
Okay, I will move that the amount for this item be reduced to $64,600.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Councillor O'Toole, did you wish to comment?
No.
I'll turn to other colleagues. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? I see all members in favor. The motion carries. Thank you. Are there any further comments or discussion from council on fire department 24-hour staffing? Seeing none, I will next turn, before opening it up to any others, just turn to community support, the 7th and 8th item.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
I think as a consequential amendment of that 12,900 reduction, shouldn't we be increasing the 2023 by that amount?
Yes, as it is an ongoing, well, sorry, I'll turn to Mr. Hicik. It was, sorry, Mr. Hicik?
2023 already has the full year budget in there, so there's no reduction or no increase required.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, I was just turning to the community support and the voluntary contribution to the CRD Arts Service and the increase in annual funding to Vancouver Island Film Commission. I appreciate the motion we made on the second item at the last meeting, but I just wanted to indicate that if we are to leave these in the budget as presented, they would turn to annual funding, whereas last year when these were approved, they were approved as 1 year, and that's why they're coming back to us this year. So I just leave that for council's consideration, and we'll turn back to council if there's any other items in these ongoing supplemental requests for 2022 to discuss. Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. Just more a question to clarify my understanding about the 10,000 to the CRD Art Service. So are you saying that if this goes through tonight, that will be an ongoing commitment from year to year?
Yeah, that's why it's in the ongoing supplementals, and it doesn't appear in the budget over the next over the 5 years of the financial plan.
So I guess I'm just wondering, so if the ARTC were to come back and say that they've had a significant number of applications or people wanting to apply for the funding that we've provided them, we wouldn't have the option then to redirect that in the future?
I'll turn to Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Absolutely, you would have the option to discontinue this voluntary contribution. It's not under contract in any way.
Okay.
So just because it's an ongoing line item doesn't mean it cannot be reduced or curtailed.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate Councillor O'Keefe's question or concern about this. The thing about making it a line item is it tends not to get brought up by staff at the next budget meeting because it is an ongoing line item that's being approved. So if you want it to come back, an alternative is to leave the 10,000 in there for 2022, but remove it for the future years. And that way you guarantee it will come back because it's not an ongoing line item.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. If just an additional comment, and I don't disagree with Councillor Wainwright's comments, is that I believe it was the second last page of the budget in the budget binder was all of the community support payments to external organizations, and as Mr. Hicik has just partially drawn attention to, many of those commitments are under contract, but others, such as this one, would not be. And I think we could turn our attention, although Councillor Wainwright is accurate to a point that we don't necessarily turn to that, but it is available for us to turn to each year. I'm sorry, I didn't see. I think next hand was Councillor Wainwright, then Councillor Fallot, then back to Councillor O'Keefe. Sorry, Councillor Wainwright, did you wish to continue?
No, I'm done.
Okay,
Thanks.
Councillor Rintoul. Sorry, Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess through the staff, this was, somewhat of a special consideration, and I think hence its initial sort of one-time status as a voluntary contribution. Do we know how it was received by CRD Arts Service? Have they asked us to renew it for the coming year, or expressed a desire to retain our long-term participation at this level, as opposed to their full program, which we declined to participate in? And should council be considering removing this item from the budget? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rintoul. We just, Mr. Hicik and I nodded. So I know through CRD work that Victoria Councillor Loveday, who's chair of the CRD Arts Commission, and they very much appreciate receiving this contribution. One reason I was in support of it just being an annual request last year is because council may recall, and I've reported out some months ago, that CRD was considering ways of moving the CRD Performing Arts Service into a regional service by which it would become a CRD tax requisition and not a municipal contribution through its financial plan. I guess I can update now. It will be coming forward in the CRD report next at our next council meeting that the CRD has chosen not to move forward on that. The CRD board has chosen not to move forward on that, and so I think we did receive a letter on this already. I'm thinking of the CRD Arts Facilities. We did receive a letter from the commission chair, I believe, and board chair Plant, requesting us to reconsider joining the CRD Arts Service, and we received that letter for information. So I appreciate that that's not within the consideration of council this year, but the contribution, as we gave last year and might continue to do, is appreciated by the Arts Commission. I'll turn to Councillor Fallot and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm comfortable with sending the $10,000 to the CRD. My preference would be that this is for this year only and not to become a line item. I think it'll be a discussion for the next council to determine what they want to do. I would prefer it that way as opposed to just become a line item, even though it may jump out to somebody's attention to regard that. I'm comfortable with the way we're doing things, that we've increased our funding to Artsy, to look to have them disperse grants to the local community arts in the area. I'm also comfortable with not being part of the CRD Art Service, but I do feel that sending something to them as a way of supporting the regional arts in that manner is sufficient. So I would make the motion that if, in fact, if that's what's required under these circumstances, that we do send the $10,000 this year, but that it not be renewed for next year.
Okay, so just to clarify your amendment, Councillor Fallett, and I do appreciate you bringing it forward, it would be to approve the $10,000 community support volunteer contribution in 2022, but remove it from the budget in subsequent years in the financial plan.
Correct.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Seconded by Councillor Rentoul. Did you wish to motivate further, Councillor Fallett?
No, that's fine, thank you.
Thanks. I'll turn to Councillor Rentoul, and then I know Councillor O'Keefe had a hand raised.
I'm fine, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to speak on the amendment? Or sorry, on the motion, not the amendment, the motion.
Yeah, sure. I'm more inclined to remove the amount entirely, and for the same reasons that I disagreed with it when we approved it last year. I think I'm more inclined.
Councillor O'Keefe, sorry.
Yes.
If we could speak to the motion, I realize
Yes.
you don't support it, but if this motion were to whether it passed or failed, you would have the opportunity to make another motion to remove it from this year. I appreciate this motion is to only remove it from 2023 to 2026, but you can't amend that motion to remove it this year because that's the motion on the floor. So
Yeah, well, no, I'm not saying I'm going to amend it. I'm just saying that I disagree with the motion, so I'm speaking to that. So I don't agree that that we would have it this year and then take it out of the budget for next year. And my preference is to not have it there at all. And because I think we should be investing, if we're going to talk about the regional arts community.
Sorry, Councillor Keefe, I'm going to interject again. You're motivating on another motion to remove it from this year, and that's not the motion. That's not the motion on the floor. So if you're in opposition to the motion on the floor, I appreciate that, but you can make a subsequent motion a subsequent motion.
Okay, I'll just say that I oppose the motion then, and I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. Councillor O'Keefe. The motion carries. Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe, did you wish to test the motion?
No, that's, the rest of my colleagues are happy with what's been passed. I'll respect that and leave it at that. We can talk about it next year. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I will turn it back to council if there are any other of those 8 items under ongoing requests from 2022, or we can move to the next section. Seeing none, I will go to the next section. And the next section is 2023 to 2026, Other Supplementals, and as Councillor Wainwright may have noted, that is actually separated into one-time supplementals in a particular year or ongoing supplementals, but it is all within the next appendix. And so that's Appendix E. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd like to move that we defer the trolley service consultant from 2023 to 2025.
I'll second that.
Councillor Wainwright to motivate.
Yeah, so this is, a project that has been brought forward, I think 4 or 5 years in a row without it ever actually making it into the current year's budget. And given the number of things we've deferred to next year and the amount of catch-up that's going to be trying to happen next year, I don't see it realistically happening next year. So I was thinking we could just take it out entirely, but deferring it for a couple of years leaves that decision for the next council.
Thank you, Councillor Wainwright. I turn to the seconder, Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I would actually be in favor if you wanted to take it out completely. I believe this went back to 2018. It came from the EDC. The last report that I recall reading about this when it came back to council was that it would be quite complicated to implement. Having said that, in scanning through our draft OCP, I think there's something in there about possible micro transit service from downtown to the west side. So I'm willing to leave it in there for another couple of years to take a look at it. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. I'll turn to Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor Fallot, and then myself.
Thank you, Mayor. I think probably 6 months ago, I would have wholeheartedly agreed and probably, contemplated removing it. I looked at this one and just thought, maybe with the amount of infrastructure development, included the Amazon project, and, the potential for other development in West Sydney, this may actually be the time to envision this undertaking, through that lens of micro transit, as Councillor O'Keefe referred to. So I think as long as the consultant who undertakes this work can look at it, from that perspective, acknowledging that we're lacking, pedestrian infrastructure between it's across the highway in particular. This may actually have some value for us, although perhaps not as originally intended. So I'd rather keep it in at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallot, or Councillor Rintoul. Councillor Fallot.
Thank you. I won't support the motion to defer it to 2025. I think this needs to be parked, and pardon the pun on that one. And if something changes in the years coming up that our community is wanting to look at it again, then there's nothing stopping any council in the future of pulling this forward. But I won't support the motion because I think it should be dropped.
Thank you, Councillor Fallot. If I could propose an amendment, and that would be to remove it from the budget and refer it to strategic planning for the next council.
Second.
So it's moved and seconded. And speaking to the amendment, as Councillor Wainwright noted, this has been in the budget for some 5 years now. It came from the previous council during our 4 strategic planning meetings during our term. We've chosen not to move it any farther forward, other than further on in the budget. And I think the idea, as it might be first been envisioned, or it might be re-envisioned, should be discussed at a strategic planning before it's brought back into the budget. Councillor Fallot is the seconder.
Thank you. Yes, I would concur with that. Although I had said I would prefer to have this dropped, I think leaving it for the next council to put in their strategic plan and then make a decision of what to do with it is something that I could work with. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. I'm not in support of the amendment to defer it to strategic planning at this time because I don't think the council in the fall will have enough information in regard to whether to go forward with this or not. I think before we can have any reasonable discussion on it, we need to get a better idea of what comes out of our active transportation plan to identify where some of the needs and the gaps are there, and perhaps to see what happens with the new transit plan that's being implemented for the peninsula, and see how we've got a couple of significant developments going up on that side of the highway. So I think it's premature to be talking about that next strategic planning. I think the idea to kick it ahead a couple of years is a good one. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any further discussion? So on the amendment, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul. The motion carries. And so the motion is amendment. On the main motion, all in favor? Sorry, the main motion is in essence the amended motion. So all in favor, sorry again.
Sorry, what's the main motion?
Sorry, I'll turn to Ms. Nelson. Do we, it was an amended motion, so,
Yes, it was an amended motion, so I think the motion that was brought forward, the first one, is not able to be pursued, I guess.
okay.
It just, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We would call it a, fair enough, thank you. Okay, there's no question to be called, thank you. Okay, Councillor Wainwright, did you have any other of the one-time requests to raise?
No.
Okay, I'll turn to council if there's any other items in the first 2 pages of Appendix E, which is the one-time request from 2023 to 2026. Councillor O'Keefe.
Oh, sorry, we're not on to the ongoing ones yet, is that correct?
Not yet. We'll be going there
Okay.
very shortly, I presume.
Okay.
Okay, seeing none, let's move to the single page with 4 items on the ongoing request from 2023 to 2026, and I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. More a question to staff. I think we've had some discussion on this already. I'm talking about the 2 fire department positions for the firefighter and the deputy chief in 2024 and 2025. And I believe maybe we've had some email conversation about this. Maybe, I can't remember if we talked about it last time, but just for my own confirmation and for maybe the benefit of the audience as well, to confirm my understanding that if we leave these in here, we're not necessarily approving those positions, that they're basically what staff refer to as placeholders. And my understanding is that when 2024 budget comes around, that staff would come forward with a report outlining the justification for that additional firefighter, and then again in 2025 for the deputy chief. So just want to confirm that my understanding of and expectation there is accurate.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr. Hicik?
Thank you, Councillor. And we have in fact discussed that at a previous budget meeting to confirm that future year supplementals are not set in stone, and that approval at this time is more approval in principle than anything. So with the fire department staffing plan, you probably are aware by this point that we'll be reporting on that regularly prior to filling any full-time long-term positions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other items on that last list to consider? Seeing none, I'll then turn to item 5B4 on the agenda, which is other general operating items, and those would be any line items in the binder that were not part of these supplemental requests that we've just considered under the first 3 items. Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mayor. The Bevan Park Reader Board for $30,000. I'd like to move that we fund that from the amenity reserve.
Second.
Okay, if I may just turn to staff for a moment, I think that's we're into capital projects.
That's correct. We're trying to finish up operating first before moving on to capital. So the last part of that is to, as the chair did, ask if there are any questions about general operating.
I'll withdraw the motion and make it at the appropriate time.
Well, thanks. Yeah, so, I mean, our budget did have the full operating budget by line item, other than the supplementals that we've had included in this agenda that were also in the binder. So I just wanted to provide the opportunity if council members had any questions or wanted to raise an item. Councillor O'Keefe.
So, sorry, are the bike racks and pedestrian crossings here or next item?
Okay, next item. We're still on operating budget. And
Okay.
we will, after we, I have a sense we're going to now have a motion, or I would seek a motion from council to approve the general operating budget as amended.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Garnett, seconded by Councillor Fallett. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? I see all members in favor. Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. So we'll now turn to 5C, the general capital budget. And Mr. Hicik has been helpful in laying out the agenda. And the first page is the tax-funded projects, broken down into 3 areas. And then the second part is the capital projects that are other than property tax funded. And so I will first turn to the tax-funded projects, Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you would indulge me in a brief intro to this section as well, I'd appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Please
thank
go
you. Just before we move on to capital, a quick summary of where we are in terms of the tax increase. So we started the night at 4.73. We've made amendments to 3 items impacting 2022 taxes. So the revised percentage change is down to 4.17%. There are additional reductions for future years as well, but we're getting closer perhaps to where council would like to end up. Now, if I may just cover a couple of slides here.
Thank you for that update, and please proceed.
Right, so similar to the supplemental items, we would like to tackle the capital plan in small segments. I propose we start with the 2022 tax-funded capital, and we'd move on to the other 2022 capital, and then to the future years, 2023 to 26, regardless of funding source. So when ready, I would similarly ask that any changes or reductions be in the form of a resolution. And once we complete all 3 sections, a motion to approve as amended would be appreciated. Now, just to cover the resources in the staff report, I do have all those slides available in case anyone wishes to look at them tonight, but it's nothing you don't already have in your package. So with that, perhaps we can move on to the 2022 tax-funded projects, which are further divided into 2 halves. One is the annual recurring project, and one carry forward from last year, and then perhaps the one that's most likely to get attention, which is the new projects for 2022. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik. So we will turn to that Appendix F, and I will turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. I'd move that the Bevan Park Reader Board be funded from the amenity reserve.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Wainwright, seconded by Councillor Garnett. Councillor Wainwright.
I think it's straightforward.
Thank you. Councillor Garnett.
I agree.
Okay, further discussion? My comment is I would actually propose that this be forwarded to strategic planning. I did note there's a brief description of the project in our binder under capital projects. There is some history for this reader board. We could certainly turn to staff if they wish to comment on it, but I think given the location of it, that it's something that should be considered in strategic planning as a community amenity, and possibly discussion with community organizations such as the BIA. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. A question through you to staff. If we remove the project from the budget and it gets discussed at strategic planning, if council decides at a future time to fund it out of the amenity reserves, they could do so. It wouldn't affect the tax rate. It would be a simple amendment. Am I correct?
If I understand correctly, the proposal now is to defer this project from the current year. So we would reduce the tax impact by $30,000 for this year. And if we wanted to include it as a placeholder for 2023 instead, then that could be certainly done. I would see this more as a budget item as opposed to a strategic plan item for the first year council, but it's up to this team.
Thank you. So we do have a motion on the floor to choose alternate funding of it in 2022. I didn't make an amendment yet. I spoke to what my preference would be going forward. So I wouldn't support this motion to change it to amenity funding, or I don't really have a view either way with regards to amenity funding. I think it should have some discussion about the value as an amenity within the community before proceeding further, and I think strategic planning would be appropriate. But I haven't made an amendment, so I'll leave the main motion on the floor and turn to other speakers. Councillor Rintoul, then Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. I would be willing to move an amendment that the item be removed from the budget and referred to strategic planning.
Okay.
I'll second.
It's actually an alternate motion, so we're changing the nature of the funding source to an alternate motion.
Fair enough.
And so,
Chair,
yep.
I'm happy to withdraw the motion.
Okay, and turn to the seconder. Sorry,
I'm happy with the original motion.
Sorry, you prefer the original motion?
Yes, Mayor.
Okay, so the seconder prefers the original motion to stay on the floor. I don't think now, you can always make a referral motion to an item that's on the floor. Generally, you're referring it to a future process in a council meeting, and that's not what the referral is. It's going to strategic planning. I'll turn to Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mayor. It occurs to me that if we remove it from the budget and fund it from reserves, there's nothing to stop council from referring it to strategic planning. It'll just be in the budget, without having any effect on taxes. And if council decides they want to do something different at that time, they can. So I don't think the two motions are necessarily hostile.
Okay, I'm actually going to speak and support the motion in that if we chose to, I do not support the motion because the motion leaves it in the 2022 budget. So I will leave my comments there. Is there further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? So all opposed? Okay, Councillor O'Keefe, Councillor Rintoul, and myself are opposed. The motion carries. So the item is amended within the 2022 budget from property tax funding to amenity tax funding. Councillor O'Keefe.
Okay, I'll try a motion arising from that then, that the reader board be referred to strategic planning in the fall.
Okay, and are you leaving it in the budget?
Well, I mean, that's already been decided by council, right? So.
Okay, sorry, a comment I was going to, and sorry, do we have a seconder? I'll second it, and go ahead, Councillor O'Keefe.
Yeah, no, I was just following up on the comments that had been previously made, that we could, I think as Councillor Wainwright said, approve it for this year, but have further discussion, as you had indicated, about what we wanted to do with that. So that's where I was going with that.
Okay. The previous motion has left the Bevan Park Reader Board in the 2022 budget, being funded from the amenity reserve. So that project would go forward in 2022. So a motion to refer it to strategic planning could only, I think, make sense if it was removed from the budget.
Okay.
I don't
I'll
see,
with-
I mean,
I'll-
if
yeah,
staff are
yeah,
gonna
no.
implement the reader board in 2022, the next
Yes.
council's discussing it at strategic planning is a moot point.
Yeah, I'll withdraw the motion.
Okay, I will try a motion to, even though the funding has been changed, I am now going to move that it be removed from the budget and referred to strategic planning. An alternate motion that council may want to consider is we can move it to the budget in 2023 and send it to strategic planning. We do, so I will put the second motion on the floor, that it be deferred to 2023 and referred to strategic planning.
I'll second that.
If I can speak to the motion, the reason for that is because we do know from the strategic planning that we have done that staff will bring future projects in the upcoming budget to strategic planning when they are major projects or when they're significant in the community. So either council or staff can bring this forward even if it's in the budget in 2023. Councillor O'Keefe?
No, I'm fine. I think you've explained it well. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Garnett?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just seeking a little clarification from staff, if that's possible. If I'm kind of lost. I have to be honest. It's in the budget. It's not in the budget. It's in the budget, but we're not going to go forward with it. Does staff have any comment as to what this actually all means?
Well, if I could clarify, the motion is
Please.
that it be deferred to the 2023 budget. So right now it's in the 2022 budget. The motion is to defer it to the 2023 budget. It would be in the budget as amenity funded. But the second part of the motion is to refer it to strategic planning, which presumably will occur with the new council in late fall of this year. In the fall of 2022. Yeah. You're welcome. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 3 opposed, Councillor Wainwright, Councillor Fallot, and Councillor Garnett. The motion carries 4-3. Councillor Wainwright, did you have other items within those tax-funded projects you wish to speak to at this time?
Not at this time.
Thank you. I'll turn to other colleagues. Councillor O'Keefe?
Now can I? But
You're on
So-
stage.
pedestrian crossings and bike racks. So I'll do them. I'll do each separately. So the first one is I will move that the $15,000 for pedestrian crossings be funded from the Alternative Transportation Reserve.
Second.
Moved by Councillor O'Keefe, seconded by Councillor Rintoul. Mr. Hicik is asked to speak first, and then I will turn to the mover and seconder. Mr. Hicik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't believe that reserve is appropriate for this. It's not really alternative transportation.
If I can just speak to Mr. Hisik's comment before turning. So in the project binder, it's on page 180. It says,
Sorry, I withdraw that comment.
okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll turn to the mover.
Yes. So when I look at the description for this project, what it says for the pedestrian crossings is, as Sydney densifies and moves towards higher volumes of active transportation, the need for pedestrian and cyclist activated crosswalks is becoming more evident. So I think since this is infrastructure that will support alternative transportation, it appears to be an appropriate expenditure. So when you look at the description for alternative transportation, it's to be used for the purpose of providing transportation infrastructure that provides alternative forms of transportation. So I think it's a fit.
Thank you. And I'll turn to the seconder.
I'll concur with Councillor Keith. I think it's a fit. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Mr. Hicik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for the confusion, but you might notice this is an annual recurring project. So if it's council's wish to fund it in 2022 from that source, perhaps you would prefer that it's funded from that source in each of the next 5 years?
Okay, just before council considers that, I have a question based on that comment. Is there precedence where ongoing funding comes out of various reserves? Or, sorry, those reserves, not the...
Well, there's certainly precedent for recurring items from year to year being funded from a reserve. Even within the current budget, there are a number of items that are partially tax funded and partially from one of the reserves.
Okay, so we have the motion on the floor. I'll turn to the mover.
No, I think I've made my case.
Okay, Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just looking for clarification. Is the motion to fund 2022 from the reserve, or are you looking to fund the next 5 years of the financial plan from that reserve? Like, is it a one-time from the reserve, or do you want to do it every year?
Well, I don't recall if this was going to be an ongoing 15,000 per year, was it? Okay, in that case, I would propose that. It seems to me something that fits with the reserve. It's definitely related to alternative transportation, and if there's precedent for using reserves for things like this on an ongoing basis, then I would propose that then.
And so the understanding, Ms.
So I assume that you would add that to the motion, that it be for ongoing years?
Well, the
I
motion,
guess what I'm uncertain about, and perhaps staff can provide some clarity, is I'm uncomfortable saying just ongoing years. I guess I'm wondering at some point they'll have done all of the pedestrian crossings they need to do. So I wouldn't anticipate that $15,000 would come out every year indefinitely. So I would presume there would be some sort of cap on that.
Okay, so for clarification, Councillor Wainwright, or Councillor O'Keefe, is based on Mr. Hisik's comments, is pedestrian crossings is $15,000 in 2022, but it's also $15,000 in 2023 to 2026.
Okay, so I'll move that it be covered till 2026 then, if that's what's in the budget.
Okay. So the motion is for it to be funded from alternative transportation from 2022 to 2026.
Yes.
I'll continue to second that.
Okay, so that's seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan?
Yeah, I will oppose having it come out every year. That to me makes it start to look like this is a routine capital expenditure, whereas this reserve feels like it should be used for specific projects that we'd be using to expand and connect our alternative transportation network, specifically what would be coming out of the plan. And I'm a little worried that if we kind of put all of some regular withdrawal into this plan, that we're going to run out and not be able to do kind of the critical projects that are required to actually expand alternative transportation, whereas, existing crosswalks and a couple added here and there aren't actually going to really affect the alternative transportation mode shift that we were looking for. So I'll oppose that.
Okay, I'll turn to first-time speakers. If I might, I'll turn to Councillor Garnett, then Councillor Fallot.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question through to staff, Mr. Hicik. So I'm assuming that these pedestrians that we're budgeting for 5 pedestrian crossings for 5 years, I mean, if we get them done before that, then they wouldn't come forward. Are we assuming it's going to take that long, or are these sort of like your placeholders that you speak of other things?
I'll let Ms. Clary provide additional information, but my understanding is it's opportunity funding to allow us to add a series of these over a number of years. They might not occur every year, but we believe that at least 5 will be required as we enhance our active transportation planning.
Okay, does that help, Councillor Garnett?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay, and I'll turn to Councillor Fallot.
Thank you. I'm going to agree with Councillor Duncan. I don't take an issue with having this come out of the fund for this year. I think there's rationale for a one-time, but to be an ongoing, that's the operation of the town, and I don't see that that's what the fund should be for. It should be for new initiatives and not to fund operations. So I won't support the motion.
Thank you. I'll turn to Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor O'Toole.
Thank you. So just to respond to those concerns about this being an ongoing thing, the way that I look at this is in a perfect case scenario, staff would have put this forward all as one thing and said, we're going to do something with these pedestrian and cyclist activated crosswalks. We're going to do it all this year. It's going to cost $60,000, and we're going to take it out of the alternative transportation reserve. And I think I would hope that people would support that. All that I see that's different here is, for whatever reason, whether it's staff needing the time to phase this in or that they can't do it all at once, that we're doing this over a period of time. This is to me not normal operations, like putting in a new stop sign or a new crosswalk. These are things that are new things. They're not something that's part of an ongoing operation, like repairing sidewalks or repairing roads. They're a new thing, a new project. And so that's why I think it's reasonable all we're doing is we're spreading it over a period of time rather than doing it over 4 years. And there's a sunset on it. It's only for 4 years. So that's why I feel comfortable with that.
Okay, before turning to next speakers, which are Councillor O'Toole and Councillor Fallot, I just want to insert for a comment. I think whether we whichever way we approve this, if it's funded this year from the Active Transportation Fund, is we are developing an active transportation plan that will be presented to Council in 2020, the new Council in 2023. I am sure the new active transportation plan will speak to a variety of initiatives, and whatever is in the budget for 2023 going forward, the future council can go ahead and deliberate and with the information from that active transportation plan. I'd leave my comment there. I'll turn to Councillor O'Toole, then Councillor Fallot.
Thank you, Mayor. And I suppose my comment is in support to a degree of what you've just said, and that is that we're not etching this in stone tonight. Future councils may revisit the source of funding for this and reevaluate it. But we're talking about, as has been described by staff, 5 new and separate pedestrian and cyclist activated crosswalks. And so I continue to think that this is well-suited use of these reserve funds. I'll support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fallot?
Thank you. I understand what Councillor O'Keefe is saying, and for the sake of that, if this were a one-time cost of $60,000 to purchase the equipment and install it, I would be supportive. For me, it is the issue that it's being spread over years, and it has the appearance, and I don't want to set the precedence on that. I would prefer something like this to be a one-time cost and not, even though there is a sunset clause to it. So I understand the goal from that Councillor O'Keefe is talking about, but for me, I can't support the ongoing, but I do support the idea. I think it has merit for it to be a one-time cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed, Councillor Fallett and Councillor Duncan. The motion carries. Thank you. And sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, I believe you had a second?
Yeah, just a little one. The bike racks. So I would move that the $5,000 allocated for bike racks be funded from the Alternative Transportation Reserve.
Second.
Discussion, Councillor O'Keefe?
You're on mute.
Sorry, Councillor O'Keefe, you're muted.
Yep, sorry, yeah, got that. Yeah, no, just looking at, as I've said before, that reserve fund is to provide transportation infrastructure to support alternative forms of transportation. So bike racks seem to fit into that category. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll support the motion, and just should note that it's only a one-off. It's only in the 2022 year, it looks like, and so we don't need to have that discussion about being a long-term effect to the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? I see all in favor, the motion carries. Thank you. Was that all, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yes, that's all for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Were there other items on the tax-funded projects in Appendix F that Council wished to bring forward? Seeing none. Are there any items in the non-tax capital funded that's in Appendix G? So that's the 3 pages of remaining capital projects that have other sources than property tax for funding. Okay, seeing no further discussion on that, I would look for a motion to approve the general capital budget as amended.
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Garnett, seconded by Councillor O'Keefe. Any further discussion? Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just use the opportunity to reiterate, as you did during public participation, around the off-leash dog park, that this budget and moving forward, certainly isn't tying council's hands with respect to necessarily location or layout of the dog park. And I know we had a number of residents provide feedback on that, so I just wanted to provide that surety. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Mr. Hicik.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think you all want to know where we stand after all those reductions, and we are at 3.76% for 2022. And if there are no additional questions or proposed changes, perhaps I could cover one more slide to let you know what's coming after this.
That would be helpful.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're down to 3.76. At the last meeting, we approved water and sewer, and that'll be followed up by the rate amendment bylaws, which will come forward in March for 3 readings and then adoption. That'll be on the 14th and 28th. Also in March, we'll be reviewing the tax distribution policy, which will likely take a couple of meetings. Not sure exactly when that'll start, probably the latter meeting in March. Actually, probably the second committee of the whole meeting in March, unless I can get it to you quicker than that. The financial plan bylaw itself will be brought forward for adoption in April, and the tax rates bylaw will come forward in late April and early May once the revised assessment roll has been received and council decisions on the distribution policy have been made. So the majority of the work is done, but there's still lots of follow-up, and I commit to getting you the best information to allow us to finish that up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hicik. Just before a motion to adjourn, just some closing remarks. I want to thank Mr. Hicik and all staff involved in the preparations of the very detailed financial plan. I believe Council has done excellent work in its review and deliberations of the budget over the last several weeks and concluding this evening. The increase we've approved for 2022 reflects a number of things. It reflects the lower taxes that we approved during the first 2 years of the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, and the need to transition away from the federal provincial COVID Safe Restart grant funds the town received and return back to normal revenue levels, as Mr. Hicik has advised us on a number of occasions. And this financial plan and the tax increase of 3.76% allows staff to maintain the level of services citizens expect, residents, businesses, community organizations, while also investing in priorities such as community safety, climate change, essential infrastructure, and community amenities. So thank you again to staff, and thank you to Council. Councilor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mayor. I think we need a final motion to approve the plan as amended. So I'll move that we approve the 2022-2026 financial plan as amended.
So
Second.
we've approved the general operating budget and we've approved the capital budget. So having approved the water and the sewer at the previous, we have completed approvals for all aspects of the budget, but I'll turn to Mr. Hicik.
You're right, Mr. Chair, we have approved the individual components, but to tie it all together, this motion is not unreasonable.
Thank you. I'll look for a seconder.
Second?
Second. Further discussion? All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And I would look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? I think that's also unanimous. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Good
Thank
night.
you.